It's been a real while since I've made a beginner's guide. Here's hoping I've improved since last time. And of course it's a Forex game, the Achilles heel of my sleeping schedule. The first half of the video is a beginner's guide and the second is the review. The goal of the beginner's guide is to make sure that when you start playing, you will be familiar with the game and you will mostly know what you're doing. I'm not gonna go heavy into strategy, just how things work. You have 4 factions to choose from. The Harkonnen, a war-heavy faction, the Smugglers, a money-making faction, Atreides, a diplomacy faction, and the Freemen, a faction that is in my opinion the best at getting spice. I will explain them better later, but at this point explaining them is pointless. Let's get straight into the game with the Harkonnen, since they are the most straightforward. Before you get into the game, you have to select 2 counselors. A good rule of thumb when you are beginning and even when you are more experienced is to just select the ones that say easy, because the things that they offer you are easier to take advantage of and are applicable to more situations. Of the 2 I selected, one gives me an extra militia slot and lengthens oppression, and the other one refunds 50% of my military unit costs on their death, and reduces the combat drugs mission cost. You will understand what it means later. Now you are in the game and you have a single ornithopter. Click on it and just make it auto recon. This is your exploration unit and can be useful to you throughout the game. But before you let the ornithopter do its own thing, you need to use it to find some spice. A purple space drug that's very valuable. And you should train at least 2 military units. I like having more melee units than ranged units since they can suck up more damage, but my rule of thumb was generally 2 melee for every 1 ranged unit. Once you found some spice, you gotta send in your steroid-fueled Dave Bautistas to take over the village that has the spice in its territory. Capturing a village costs authority. You don't have many ways to generate authority, but 2 ways are trading with a siege. You trade them water for authority, but you have to find the siege first. And the other is an event on the map that your ornithopter can find for you, where you pay 500 solari, aka money, to get some authority. You also need water. It's hard to stay moist in the desert, so to get water you need to make a wind trap in a village, which will suck in the moisture in the air to give you water. The building stuff is fairly simple, the only thing you have to worry about is upkeep. The next thing to do is development. This is like a research thing and I really can't recommend any developments over the others since they are all useful, but in general the economy ones are good to focus on, since you don't want money to ever become an issue. You can get plascrete to make buildings anywhere, but for solari and spice you're gonna need to find a village with spice or a solari mine thing. Then you can build a refinery for the spice and a processing plant for the solari. The spice needs harvesters and you should, I don't think you need to, assign a crew to the harvester. And you should put it on auto recall, since sandworms will come around to try to eat your harvester, and that's not very profitable. Now the goal is just expanding and building your villages up and making sure you are upkeeping with your upkeep. Like manpower, you need to make recruitment offices for manpower to be able to recruit military units. And you need manpower for airfields and missile batteries. If a village of yours is vulnerable, like close to one of the enemy factions or getting raided by bandits often, you should get a missile battery to shoot them. And the airfield is just a way to move your units around more quickly. And of course, you need to hire militias to protect your village. They don't cost upkeep, just an upfront cost of money and manpower. The military base makes your units stronger in that territory. The last of the buildings are the statecraft buildings, the blue ones. They can increase research speed, your intel generation, your hegemony. Hegemony is basically score. And lastly, it can generate influence. By the way, if you get 25,000 hegemony, you win the game. You get hegemony for pretty much everything you do, so don't worry about it. Influence is used in a Landsrat. This is where you can pass resolutions that can either positively or negatively affect factions, like making them suffer 30% higher manpower upkeep or trying to get yourself lower Solari upkeep. You can also use the Landsrat to win a political victory by getting elected Duke of Arrakis. But you need high Landsrat standing for that. How do you get high standing? There's an intel scheme and you get it by getting positive resolutions for yourself, I think. It's not explained very well in the game. The last system in the game is the intel. This is where you can be a sneaky boy. There's a lot of stuff to do with intel, but the ones I most frequently use is gear sabotage, which makes enemy units weaker, crowd manipulation, which starts a rebellion in the targeted territory, and the 3-stage assassination that eliminates an enemy faction. You can also use atomics if you're a bit of an upsetty Betty. It's a nuke and just wipes out the village and everything in it. I never used it because it costs a lot of Landsrat standing. Other than the operations is making agents infiltrate certain places like enemy factions, Arrakis itself, the Landsrat, the Spacing Guild, and Chome. Each of these has some benefits and they are explained well, so just give them a read. The spice tax. You need to keep a good stockpile of spice to pay off the Empire, otherwise something bad happens. I think I missed taxes once and all that happened was that my spice to Solari exchange rate got worse. But yeah, just keep a healthy balance between money exchange and stockpile. The last way for a victory over a faction is just sending your dudes to destroy the enemy base. The enemy base doesn't seem to regenerate health, so you can just kamikaze the Bautistas into it until it dies. But you can't just make your Bautistas run across the map to a base because they will die. Supplies will run out if you do that. A Bautista requires 5 kilograms of beef a day to sustain those glorious muscles. That's why you need to take villages closer to the enemy bases. It will take some time to generate the authority, but hey, it's a way to win. In the main base, you need 2000 hegemony to be able to make buildings there. The buildings are hugely beneficial but cost a lot of upkeep. Okay, time for the factions. The Harkonnen, authoritarian, warlike, tyrant douchebags. They have the best military presence in the game and their unique ability is being able to squeeze more resource production out of a village by oppressing them. I didn't actually use this because it can cause unrest, which can cause rebellions, and rebellions are annoying to deal with because you need to get your units back there to kill the rebels. That's why airfields are a good idea. I don't want to just list off all the small percentage bonuses, so I'll just sum up the factions. So the summary for Harkonnen is that if you want to win with war and you like fighting, then the Harkonnen is the best choice. They have the best military defense by having more militias in villages than any other faction. And they can train units faster if you pick a certain councillor. And most of the councillors are geared at hurting other factions or making war less resource heavy. House Atreides, the faction with Oscar Isaac and Timothée Chalamet. It's a diplomacy faction and has the most focus on the Landsrat. This is the best faction if you want a diplomacy victory, and if you pick Lady Jessica as a councillor, you can even force a treaty upon an enemy faction, like a research or trade agreement or a non-aggression pact. Atreides can peacefully annex a village, so you don't have to send your troops in, but it happens pretty slowly. Their military isn't necessarily weak, but it's clearly not the main focus for Atreides. So if you're threatened by another faction, you should attack with a combined effort of soldiers, negative resolutions in the Landsrat, and an intel crowd manipulation. They also cannot pillage neutral villages. Pillaging villages is just a good way to get gold. The smugglers. Cash rules everything around me, cream get the money. They are all about resources and money. They have good resource gathering in their own territories, but the best way they gather resources is a little bit of theft. They can build underworld headquarters in opponents' villages and steal 30% of the village's resources. Additionally, the underworld headquarters can also help you when you attack the village by causing damage to the defending militia and giving you health regeneration. They can also place bounties on Landsrat resolutions, so if other factions vote the way you want, they get paid money. Yes, government corruption is a game mechanic. The smugglers are sneaky little bastards, and I love them. And that's probably because they remind me of the Zaan Consortium from Star Wars Empire at War. The Fremen. Spice is the spice of life. They are the only ones that can gather spice without having to worry about sandworms, since their harvesting building doesn't attract them, and they don't have access to airfields. Instead, they have thumpers to attract sandworms, which then eat the military units and spit them out wherever you want. They also suffer less supply drain on the military units, and with a Kulan caravan, you can commit stealth attacks on enemies. Later in the game, they can also benefit from neutral villages. With a certain development, you can get money from neutral villages, so it's an incentive to liberate the villages from opposing factions rather than taking them over. Okay, I think I've covered everything. If there is anything I missed, then please let me know in the comments, or if there is anything you would like explained further, ask in the comments. I'm usually pretty fast at responding. I know I have at least covered what I would have liked to know when I started playing the game, since I didn't feel the game offered a good tutorial and didn't explain something super well, like how to get Landsrat standing. Now it's time for the review. It's an early access game, so you do expect stuff like frame rate dipping and some freezes. Which happened. The game would sometimes just stop, I assume because it was loading all the stuff that was happening in the game, and the frame rate usually hung around 40. All these systems in the game, like the intel, the Landsrat and the combat, feels shallow. But when you put them all together, it feels like it has some depth. But it still feels too shallow, like it's missing something extra to really suck you in. But the game isn't finished, so maybe at release it will be more deep. It is a good game, but right now I would have a really hard time recommending this game over most other 4X games. Like Civilization 6 for example. And I think the reason for that is that in Dune Spice Wars it feels like there are a lot less moving pieces in the game world to keep your eye on. Less stuff to manage, less stuff to do. I really like when 4X games are real time, and usually in them you have to pause a lot to keep up with them, like in Star Drive. But in Dune, I spent a lot of time just waiting for authority to generate and just had the game on 2x speed most of the time. Because there wasn't really a lot for me to do except wait for stuff to happen. So I think the game needs more stuff to keep you active. I engaged heavily in the combat and I'm pretty 50-50 on it. Specifically the supply stuff. On the one hand, I understand why the supply system is there. It's balanced, so you can't go super far to mess up an enemy village, or you have to work around it if you can. But I don't like it, because I feel it's such a limiting factor on making interesting strategic moves with your military. And it makes most of the combat just happen around your borders. I like the Landsrat and the intel operations. They make the game far more interesting and offer more strategic approaches. And I love the smugglers. The whole underworld headquarters thing, I love when 4Xs have that. To sum it up, it's a little too simple and small for me, and the performance issues need to get fixed. Other than that, it's a fun game, but one I don't think I will be returning to. This was a very dry video for the dry deserts of Dune, so I give the game a dry score. 7 out of 10. This video isn't quite like my usual videos. I'm often a little more jokey, but sometimes you've just gotta go in dry and hope there isn't too much tearing. Hee hee. I'm working on more stuff like the usual reviews, but the game I picked takes a very long time and is very addicting. So subscribe for that, and if you have any criticism over the beginner's guide or the review, then please let me know, because criticism is the best tool for improvement. And if you're new to the channel, might I recommend the Elden Ring video? People really like that, and the Vampire Survivors review. I like how that turned out, and if you want me to make a video on a game, then let me know in the comments and I'll put it on the list. You can find that list on the Discord. Call me Uncle Brian and have a moist day.